welcome to the February meetup of Drupal Atlantic. This week is going to be a pretty exciting one. We've got a special guest, which we'll get into in a minute. But first, we're going to get straight into the Drupal news for this month of February. Drupal 8.5 is just around the corner, releasing March 7th of this month, or this month of March. It represents the next iteration of Drupal 8 and along is expected to drop March 7th, along with all the bug fixes and improvements that go into each quarterly dot release. There are some notable new quirks, features, and things to take note of. Let's take a quick run through them. In the new features for Drupal 8.5, we'll start off with probably one of the more publicized additions, which is the out-of-the-box experience initiative, or Umami. Umami represents a fully functional website that's a demonstration of what Drupal 8 can do out of the box. So what does this mean exactly? Sometimes we need to start up a demonstrator site to be able to showcase what Drupal can do to show prospective clients, students, and stakeholders the features and power of Drupal. Up till now, you need to set up a working demo. You have to scaffold things in front of them, or you can use some pre-built packages like Acquia Lightning or some of the pre-built installation profiles that exist in the contributed space. The problem with those is they were not complete and didn't necessarily show off a complete user experience for end users and decision makers. In came the out-of-the-box experience initiative and Umami's demonstration. Umami is a fictional food magazine website. This website is designed to act as a way to help evaluators explore core concepts like fields, blocks, views, taxonomies, etc. The out-of-the-box demo site gives you recipe, feature, article, and simple page, which demonstrates content types, some sample content with text, photography for those content types, a beautifully designed custom theme, and an install profile that loads the sample content and the custom theme. Umami is not meant to be used as a production website. It's only meant to be shown as an evaluation and demonstration tool, but solves a critical gap in the sales and evangelism of Drupal to stakeholders and potential evaluators. Sorry about that. Next in the Drupal 8.5 update list comes a new experimental module called Layout Builder in core, which is kind of inspired with the display suite and panels initiatives. This new feature set gives site builders powerful drop-in controls over content and elements. You start with predefined layouts for different sections of the page, and then populate those layouts with one or more Drupal blocks. Extending beyond 8.5, the goal is to add this functionality to field layout, which is the managed display area, and give people even more power over every piece of their content. Another new feature for 8.5 is the concept of outside-in editing patterns. The goal is essentially to make it easier for users to configure and edit areas of their sites without having to dig deep into configuration areas and non-intuitive menus. It makes it dead simple to change the end-user visible pieces from the front end. Other improvements in 8.5 include media, additional core changes that make support more efficient and paving the way for the roadmap to edge closer to reality. Performance, one of the big things in performance, is now BigPipe is enabled by default. For those who are not aware what BigPipe is, BigPipe is a core module included since 8.1. This module implements the BigPipe technique developed by Facebook. This technique greatly improves page load times by only streaming personalized or dynamic parts of a page while caching the remaining static pieces. There's quite a bit more to talk about with 8.5, and we could fill a whole show with it. But these are just some of the things that we can look forward to in this release. Even more exciting is what's being projected for 8.6 in September of this year. a more fully featured media experience with robust workflow, trash module perhaps, stable layout builder, and form layouts. Kind of a pretty dramatic and dynamic time for Drupal as far as features goes. So what do you think of that, Trevor? Are you excited for the 8.5 stuff coming in?
Yeah, very excited. The Umami looks really interesting, and the ability to kind of show off what Drupal's really capable of really quickly and kind of out of the box. And I think the performance improvements with Big Pipe are going to be pretty big as well. I've seen some demos of that can make quite a huge difference on your initial page loads, if you're dealing with dynamic data and stuff as well.
Of course, yeah, it's pretty exciting. All right, so what's up next?
Up next is Drush 9.0.0 has been released. It was released on January 24th with one key new feature and some under-the-hood changes. The major feature is generators. Generators builds on the DCG project and allows a user to generate a Drupal module, controller, plugin, entity, migration, or many more. Because it was built on the DCG project, Drush now offers over 100 generators. The Drush config, site alias, and output format systems were rewritten. The YAML files are now much easier to read and share, and you were able to use these subsystems in other PHP projects if you'd like. The command authoring process has been modernized as well. You can now start with a generator and follow the comments to add your own logic. The generator can also port command files from previous versions. Drush also now builds upon Symfony where possible, just like Drupal 8. And another kind of note is that drush.org has been converted to a marketing site, with docs.drush.org now being the documentation site. They've also removed Drush DL, Drush Make, and Drush PM update code, and are now using Composer instead to align with what Drupal 8 is doing.
Cool. I think one of the interesting things there, really quickly, to touch on that, is that it seems like Drush rather, is kind of picking up where Drupal console is kind of spearheading, where you can do a lot more of the generator kind of things, which was kind of Drupal console's selling feature. And now that's being added to Drush, which makes it interesting and kind of interesting to see where each of these has a home going forward.
Yeah, I mean, competition's always good, right? So keep each other on top of their games, if nothing else.
Of course, yeah, exactly. All right, well, moving on. One of the cool things that was released on the 21st of January, or February rather, was the DrupalCon speakers list was released. On February 21st, DrupalCon released the accepted speakers list for Nashville, over 180 accepted sessions across 15 topic areas. Nothing's off the table, from front-end development, technical leadership, DevOps, and community building. There are even some sessions talking about WordPress, which should be very interesting. If you can't make it to DrupalCon this year, be sure to check out the Drupal Association YouTube channel. You can see show recordings and most sessions, as well as events like the keynote and the Dries note will be available there. It's not quite like being there in person, but it gives you most of the content.
Yeah, it should be an exciting DrupalCon. I know we've got a couple of guys going from work. They're very excited about it. There's lots of great speakers and talks going on there for sure. Not, like you say, not just necessarily Drupal, but all different aspects of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I know as WordPress, there's a lot of core PHP stuff, front-end work, that kind of thing. And I believe our guest today is even a speaker at DrupalCon this year. So that's pretty exciting.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Okay, so moving on.
Yeah, our last piece of news, I guess, is the Drupal core critical updates. So the first security advisory of 2018 dropped on the 21st of February, and everyone's urged to upgrade as soon as possible to avoid issues. The critically ranked vulnerabilities in this advisory affect both Drupal 8 up to 8.4 and Drupal 7 up to the latest version. Along with the SA updates released for both 7 and 8, Drupal 7.56 and Drupal 8.4.5. The Drupal 8.4.5 release also represents the final release of of the 8.4 branch ahead of the 8.5 release next month. There are too many things in this essay to cover here, but please check out the links to this and all of the stories in this episode in our show notes at drupalatlantic.ca/meetups. Again, along with any of these security releases, users are strongly urged to update as soon as possible.
Yeah, definitely something we don't want to procrastinate on if we can certainly help it.
No, for sure.
Some of these vulnerabilities are pretty important to deal with, so definitely urge users to check those out as soon as they can. So that basically concludes our news portion of this, and we'll move on to our special guest. Our extra special guest this month, joining us from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, is Mike Gifford. Mike Gifford is the founder and president of Open Concept Consulting, Inc., a web development agency specializing in Drupal CMS. Open Concept is a certified B Corporation, B Corp, and works to ensure that we have a positive impact on our clients, our people, and our community, and the people that and the world that we live in. Mike has spearheaded accessibility improvements in Drupal since 2008 and officially became a Drupal core accessibility maintainer in 2012. Mike also wrote a Drupal security best practices to highlight approaches of some of the best practices in securing your site. Mike is the co-founder of Civic Tech Ottawa, a community of individuals who are working for more open and engaged participation between citizens and governments. Using innovative technology, policy, and design solutions, citizens can work with their governments to help better shape their communities. He has been involved in engaging with federal, provincial, and municipal governments to adopt more open source and open standards approaches and encourages broader understanding of open government. Welcome, Mike, and we're super glad you could join us.
I'm glad to be here. Sorry I couldn't come in person. It would be a lot more fun to be able to get together in person over a beer and talk about this.
For sure. But it's certainly great to have you around now, or have you here tonight.
I wanted to say that there's been some accessibility work on the Umami theme, and a group of people who are involved in the accessibility Slack channel and the accessibility team were involved in making sure that when Umami was released, that included a lot of accessibility improvements. So making sure that the color contrast was all right, making sure that the images had alt text, and I've never actually seen, this is the first time where I've seen somebody actually go through and make the alt text actually sound really tasty. It's like it's a food place, and the alt text was quite delicious sounding. So it was a nice thing. And the layout builder is another interesting one that to see get released, and there's a bit of a challenge with that one because the drag and drop functionality that's part of the layout builder there isn't actually a good defined pattern yet for doing that accessibly on the internet. So there's been a bit of an effort in the last few months to try and find a best practice and find a way to implement that within Drupal. So that's again an exciting thing to be part of, and to see Drupal be sort of leading the pack in terms of content management systems that are working on addressing these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got a little ways to go yet, knowing what we know about other CMS products out there. Other ones have kind of led the way of making it dead easy for as many users as possible to get on board.
For sure.
Perhaps at the, the compromise of more granular functionality, which is kind of Drupal's power, but it's also its weakness anyways.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
All right. So we put together a few questions, and I think we'll start off first on the topic of accessibility. And the big one, I guess the question is, what brought you to pick up the torch of accessibility, so to speak?
Well, I guess this is going back to DrupalCon DC or Boston. I'm not sure where it was, and I'll blame WebChick for it, because I ran into an accessibility issue and I pointed it out to WebChick at one point at the conference, and she said, "Well, you can deal with that. Just submit a patch." It was like, man. And then after I don't know how many hundreds of patches I've submitted at this point, but it became a bit of an addictive process. It's interesting to be able to actually go and fix part of the internet and be able to slowly shift 3% of the internet to be more accessible. There aren't that many platforms that allow you to go off and actually address these changes on a big level and to deal with some challenges that a lot of people haven't felt before. So it's a little bit addictive being able to go off and to make changes and fix problems, and not simply go off and like, there's certainly challenges with fixing accessibility problems on an individual site, and it's good when you're able to resolve a problem with an individual website. But if you can solve a problem that addresses 1 million websites around the world, that's a much bigger impact, and so much of accessibility is really requiring people to go off into, it needs to be enabled by default, because people don't generally look to go off and add on accessibility features after the fact. There aren't enough people who have the expertise. So if you can boil in good defaults into the core product, then you're much better off. So do people have, does that make sense in terms of how I got into it and the direction of what took me down the path of getting involved in accessibility?
I think so. I think it's kind of a really neat journey that you've kind of followed, and it's changing accessibility on the web is kind of one of those things. I don't know if you can ever really win that battle necessarily. There's been a lot of bad habits all around for a long time.
No, and it's also, I mean, accessibility it's not a, no site is going to be 100% accessible. Everything is just like security. It's a journey and not a destination. You want to try and improve practices. You want to make sure that you're starting with good defaults, but you need to keep up and maintain it on an ongoing basis. And you can't just sort of assume that it will that once your site is set up and you've evaluated it for being accessible, that it's accessible from now on, right? The internet changes so quickly, and like with security, you have to, if you're not evaluating your site and keeping up with updates on a regular basis, you're gonna find yourself compromised.
Yeah, fair enough.
Sure. So maybe, Mike, if you could give us a definition of exactly what accessibility is, and maybe why it matters so much.
So accessibility is, web accessibility is really the effort to try and make sure that everyone can access your website. So this is people who are blind, people who have cerebral palsy or have mobility issues. There's people who use the internet in a whole range of different areas, and that there's a problem with most of us who sort of assume that most web developers are younger people with good vision, and there's a tendency to forget about all the people who are colorblind or who have low vision or are in a situation where maybe they have a dyslexia, and there's so many different ways that people are facing barriers on the web, and it's about 10 to 20% of the population faces some barrier on the web. Not on all sites, but on some sites. So maybe you're deaf and you can't listen to the videos. Maybe you've just injured your hand and you're having trouble using your mouse, or your arm's in a cast and you're having to use your left arm to go off and when your right arm is dominant. Or even for that matter, if you have a mobile device and you go outside and you try and read something outside on a nice sunny day, you could have a lot of difficulty being able to see the site and be able to read the information, particularly if there's low contrast. So trying to ensure that there are mechanisms so that sites are built with proper contrast, so that however you're trying to address, you're able to access that information and make sure that it's as versatile as possible. And people often think about about sort of the edge case and think about accessibility as this really small edge case, but it's easy to go off into for project managers and for clients to sort of to take accessibility and basically write it off as something that's a really low priority, nowhere near as important as something like security. Um, but if you tell them, that you can't sell your products to baby boomers, that we're going to just write off that portion of your client base. Anyone over 65 can no longer buy your products. There aren't that many clients that would be that interested I mean, that's a much more compelling issue, and often people who are seniors don't identify as people who have disabilities. But if we're lucky enough to grow old, then it's just natural for our bodies to slowly be to break down, and our eyesight isn't going to be as good as it was when we were 20. Our reflexes are not going to be as good. Even things like how we navigate a website and how we can map out where information is and how it's organized. That all changes when we get older. So if we're trying to go off and design for edge cases is really quite useful for that perspective as well, and that there's a whole range of people who are probably consumers of your products or your services that are people who don't necessarily identify as having a disability, but that will benefit greatly from having more attention paid to accessibility and making sure that it's meeting the guidelines that the World Wide Web Consortium has released. Does that explain accessibility?
I think it does. The yeah.
Yeah, no, that was great, Mike. You mentioned off a lot of points there that I wouldn't have thought of off the top of my head either. So there's definitely a lot to it, a lot more than I think most people think about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I guess kind of bringing it home a little bit here.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing what we know about accessibility, what does Drupal do well in terms of accessibility out of the box? What does it, and kind of what does it do poorly?
So Drupal, I mean, I'm a very biased person because I've been working on Drupal 7 and Drupal 8's accessibility now since 2009. So I've seen a bunch of the issues and helped push forward many of the issues, and they have. I know both how much work needs to be done as well as how much work has been done to address accessibility in Drupal 8. And I'm still confident that Drupal is the most accessible content management system that there is out of the box. So WordPress is probably a close second, but there's no other content management system that has done as much to build in accessibility defaults into that core implementation. So if you install Drupal core, you're going to be in a position where you're starting with some very good assumptions, with a development environment that's being tested and evaluated by screen readers, by a whole bunch of people with disabilities at various different centers around the world. There's a whole bunch of people who are using Drupal from various different organizations that serve people with disabilities, like the AbilityNet or the Royal National Institute of the Blind or the National Federation of the Blind. So a lot of testing has been done on Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 to try and make sure that it is a good platform. And with Drupal 8, we've improved on Drupal 7 in that we've upgraded from using HTML4 to HTML5, and HTML5 is just much more semantic. It's more future-proof, and it allows whatever device you're accessing it with to be able to pull rich data from your phone and convey more meaning so that you have a better experience. And we've also used ARIA, so the Web Accessibility Initiative's Accessible Rich Internet Applications Framework is a tool that allows you to identify the to give you more semantic meaning for various dynamic functions. So, for example, error messages when they pop up on the screen, anything that's dynamic, you can provide additional definition to so that a screen reader can identify it and be able to get meaning from that. And so much of the web is now is being changed dynamically, and there's right now a mechanism to be able to manage that and to have a centralized library to be able to manage how dynamic content is being added to the site. Drupal's actually been really quite good at being able to provide centralized resources for things and to try and standardize them. So one of the common problems for accessibility that we solved in Drupal 7, well, sort of solved, is the challenge of CSS display none. So with that one-liner that a lot of developers and designers use to hide content, if you use CSS display none, well, the assistive technology devices like JAWS or NVDA or VoiceOver, they interpret that literally. So they hide anything that's listed as display none. So if you want to be able to hide content for a sighted user, so it doesn't get in the way of the design, but you want to keep it exposed so that users are able to, who are using screen readers, can benefit from the semantic meaning, you need to be able to have a different way of conveying the information. There's also the functionality to be able to support keyboard-only users. The people often forget about the people who navigate around a website by using their keyboard, and it could be that they're using maybe their site is fine, but they just can't use a mouse. Maybe they've got carpal tunnels. Maybe they're using a sip and puff machine and they have very limited control. Maybe they can just use one finger, and their only way to navigate through the site is to tab through it through using the keyboard and the tab interface. But there's mechanisms now to go off and to show information on focus and making sure that the keyboard that when the keyboard is being given or when somebody's using keyboard controls to navigate through the website, that the focus is much clearer on different things and that you can display information on focus. But in Drupal we've centralized that and made it easy and consistent for people to use and add to their modules and themes so that there's a centralized way to do this. And this is centralizing is quite important because the internet keeps changing and browsers don't necessarily always respect the same rules, and there's this is actually an outstanding issue with the current implementation of visually hidden. We've used a CSS class that's being depreciated. So clip is the function, the CSS function that we've used, and clip is no longer being supported in the latest version of CSS. So we have to update that to make sure that we're using a different method to go off and to hide content than we are currently. But if you centralize it, then you only have to change it in one place. You don't have to hunt and peck around, all of your modules and themes to find out, how people have chosen to line up certain pieces of or to hide certain kinds of content.
So in how Drupal is compared to other CMSs, is it being open source and as community driven as it is? Does that make a difference as to how well it's performing accessibly compared to other open source solutions or even closed source solutions that are out there?
I think that open source solutions have a big advantage over closed source solutions, proprietary solutions, because in open source projects expect to have an issue queue that's open that you can see, and you expect to be able to tag issues in that issue queue for different issues. And one of them that is on many or most open source projects is one about accessibility and evaluating that project for accessibility. And it's really useful to be able to have that open issue queue so that people can report issues and so they can be dealt with. And you can see what are the unknown or what are the issues that are outstanding that still need to be fixed. it is very possible that there are more open issues for accessibility in Drupal 8 than there are in any other content management system, because there are quite a few open accessibility issues, but we've fixed even more accessibility issues than the ones that are open, and and you can look at them and you can learn from them, and you can look at our solution and how we came about it and what the path was, and decide if that's a good implementation or not. And whereas in a proprietary system, you wouldn't necessarily have an issue queue. You wouldn't necessarily be able to search it publicly and be able to find information to see if anyone else has had the same problem. And you're also not necessarily going to have the same motivation. So if you're working on an accessibility issue for a site of your own, you can't just, it's actually really obnoxious to go off and to ask people to test your own website. Hey, you with a disability, can you come here and test my website and help me figure out whether or not this is going to meet the accessibility requirements I have or not? I mean, that's I think people with disabilities are asked to do that quite a lot, and I think it gets quite frustrating for them to have to or to do that and be asked to do that on an ongoing basis. But if you're doing it for an open source project, and if you know that the work is ultimately going to benefit not just this one particular organization, but you might be able to resolve a problem that addresses 1 million websites, well, that's a much easier sell. And it's not just going to benefit a particular client. It's going to benefit, potentially thousands of different organizations who would be able to say, okay, this is something that just by using the Drupal process, you're going to benefit and be able to improve accessibility for everyone. And that sort of community spirit's a really useful thing. Another thing I didn't actually talk about earlier that's unique about, or not unique, but is really quite good about Drupal is that it's very much API driven. So you have there's a lot of centralized functions that are controlled in one place, and so you don't have to, Drupal core has certainly grown over the years, but there's an effort to have a very tight core and to use modules and themes to extend those elements of core. But our focus is being to fix core so that whenever you're extending that, you're taking that best practice and bringing it into your module. So if you're developing a module and you're following the best practices of Drupal core and emulating the other modules that are part of core, you're going to be bringing in some accessibility best practices into your modules or theme, whether you know about it or not, if you're just following the examples that are there and leveraging the APIs that are part of Drupal. And again, that's something that not everyone has done and is set up.
So kind of closing this particular question off and kind of expanding on a couple of those things you've said, what kind of modules or things in the contributed space do you regularly point to that kind of improve or enhance Drupal accessibility experience?
Sure. I mean, often it comes down to looking at what are the initial themes that you're using, and there are definitely some modules that can benefit you, and certainly in Drupal Drupal 7 there are some modules that have been useful to deal with things like inline form errors. There's a module in Drupal 7 to help manage inline form errors and to deal with those. So there's a few modules out there that are worthwhile looking at, but trying to enable the inline form modules in Drupal 8 is really quite important. Right now, still that's that's not enabled by default. It should be, and hopefully it will be soon. But right now, it's not something that's enabled by default. And starting with the core themes is useful. So if you're building a theme, starting with Classy is quite useful, so that those are quite. A lot of testing has been done on the Classy theme, and if you can start with that base theme, you're going to be further ahead. There are what are some other? Most of the focus has been trying to improve core, and so we're not looking at adding on additional modules for the most part. And there's things that one thing, a feature, an accessibility feature that a lot of people see is a text resize button, and they want to have that text resize button so that people can make the fonts larger, and that makes sense. Except that a far better way to make your fonts larger on your website is to actually use Control Plus and to make them smaller with Control Minus. So if you use your keyboard to use your browser to adjust the size of your fonts, you have far more power and control than you would have if you used a little text size widget on your site. So that's something that should be done. There's one module that hasn't been ported yet to Drupal 8 that I do recommend, which is the page style module, and that allows you to go off and to shift your contrast from a normal mode to a black and white mode, and a yellow and sorry, a black and white, white and black, and then blue and yellow and blue. So that there's some people who can see much better with a different kind of contrast. So maybe they need to have a black background, maybe they need to have a blue background. But if you can give people the option to switch it quite easily in the browser, that can be a really useful benefit for people.
For sure. So maybe we can jump to our first user submitted question. This was submitted by Jeff Kearson. He's just wondering if you can talk about how Drupal itself works as an accessibility tool for government employees to use, and how it compares with other tools that claim to be accessible. And his example was SharePoint.
SharePoint is, yeah, that's just marketing. Let's just leave it at that as far as SharePoint. But as far as for government employees in Drupal, there's a few things that are really quite useful. One of them is that we've done a lot of work to make sure that the back end of Drupal is accessible. So when you're with most other content management systems, there's the assumption that you only need to make the front end accessible, so that the people who are using the site are not going to have any accessibility challenges. Unfortunately, that's just not the case, particularly in government. Most government departments have between 2 and 10% of their workforce has a disability, and so whether it's somebody who's blind or somebody who's using Dragon Naturally Speaking to navigate the website, there's a reasonably high portion of people who have some kind of disability in the workplace in government. And the government has taken a tendency to go off and to deal with accommodation, and to try and provide a mechanism for to accommodate users with disabilities. And I think that is one approach that has been taken because with proprietary solutions, there isn't very much you can do to control how content is managed, or how the software is managed. But with an open source solution, and particularly one like Drupal that's had quite a lot of accessibility work done in it, you can, if you run into a barrier in Drupal, you can fix it. You can adjust the code. You can make modifications to it that are benefiting not just your own employee in this one particular situation, but potentially benefiting everyone. So Drupal is really useful from that perspective. Drupal is also being quite heavily used in a lot of government sites, and whether that's up in the north, the Yukon just recently launched one, which I think that was a fairly expensive site, but I'm not sure how much of that was the actual implementation of the software. I think they said that the implementation cost them nearly $500,000, but they think it's going to save them $75,000 a year on the maintenance side. So that's encouraging to hear, and who knows what they were paying for before with their previous implementation. But the just the use of Drupal, particularly in multilingual situations, is really quite. It's a great platform for government, where you need to have a lot of small chunks of content, and you need to be able to have a very well controlled workflow, and you need to have it to be accessible for people who are accessing your site and creating content to your site as well. Is that good?
Yeah, that's
Cool.
pretty great. And it kind of moves into the next question too. Or many people say Drupal is a good fit for government, and why do you feel that's the case? I think you've already partially answered that.
I think it's. I mean, part of it's also. I mean, where government is going to, and who are the. What is the future of government? I think that government is struggling to go off and find and redefine itself in a digital era, and the governments that are really taking a lead on this are ones like the UK, and the government digital services in the UK has done some really interesting work, and they have open source built into their platform as one of the 10 digital principles. So is 18F in the US. They built that in and talked about the importance of open source and working in the open. And the other one is a bunch of other ones have done this. Like the Australian government has standardized on Drupal, and in fact they took a lot of the policies that were written in the UK and just brought them into the Australian government. And in fact, there's a strange little Drupal connection here. The one of the people who was quite instrumental in setting up the government's GDS strategy in the UK, Lisa Wright. She actually, before she started working for government, was working with Drupal.org and trying to go off and to work on the restructuring and reframing of Drupal. And if you look for the Prairie Initiative, you can see months and months of work that she did trying to go off and get the Drupal community to agree to a greater, to an improved usability structure, and to agree on how to go off and to structure the community so that the needs of the users were taken first, and there was a more of a more design thinking built into how Drupal works. But she moved from the UK to Australia, and set up the Australian government technology services or something like that, or not set up, but she was involved in bringing over policies and ideas that worked in the UK to Australia, and helping them get on board with open source and open policies as well. But it's, open government is such a is where a lot of leading government agencies are going. Canada has just recently signed up to be one of the Digital 7, and along with, I think it's Estonia, the UK, Korea, and I've forgotten who the other ones are, but there's a number of countries that are really doing some interesting work trying to build collaboration and to work with citizen engagement, and be rethinking how to use government as a platform to serve its citizens better. And all of that is based on an assumption of open source and an assumption of collaboration. And Drupal is a really great tool, because a lot of government employees don't know how to collaborate outside of their silos. And working with the Drupal community is a great way to go off and to say, okay, well, how did the White House do this? How did NASA do this? How did NATO do this? How did they learn to go off and to share and contribute back to this community? And where are the precedents that we can point to, so that when the stodgy old CTO says, oh, we can't do this, this isn't secure, we can say, well, maybe it's not secure enough for the for your needs, but it's good enough for the United Nations. So I guess the county of Halifax Center or whatever it is, maybe they have higher security needs than the United Nations does, but I don't think so. So it can be useful to go off and to highlight precedents, and to talk about how government is using Drupal and sharing information and best practices, and leveraging open source to be able to have a bigger bang for the buck.
Yeah, so we hear about a lot of the good things that Canada, that's being done in the government CMS space. Like we know about the conventions and stuff like that. Like I think it's GovCMS that happens in the US.
Yeah. Or no,
Um,
Australia.
okay,
GovCMS is Australia. Yeah.
okay. What's the one that was in Washington last year? Was it?
Oh, sorry, the conferences?
Yeah.
This is the GovCon.
Yes.
Drupal
Right,
GovCon.
yeah, I knew a few people who went down to those.
Yeah.
And we
They're,
know,
they're
I mean,
good.
even locally here in Canada, we have some kind of good leadership there. Like Nova Scotia, for example, has standardized on Drupal.
Great.
I we have contribution to the Drupal space, even in the Canadian government federal level, with WetKit and stuff like that.
For sure.
But there's also a little bit of not so good things that happen, I guess, with any government issue, and it kind of leads back to stakeholders in a way.
Yeah.
The question kind of is, in light of the debacle that was the Canada.ca implementation failures in the last few years, which I think we're still paying for, what can governments and stakeholders learn as a lesson or take away from and when considering their web ecosystems?
That's a good question. And it's quite interesting to actually see government making the same mistakes over and over and over again. And I am quite confident that the same mistakes that were made for Canada.ca have not been, or they're going to get made again and again, because government doesn't seem to understand at this point that a small agile process working on open source and open standards is the best way to assure that you have that you're able to meet the needs of your clientele, your citizens in a responsible way. But yeah, there's been this whole mindset about centralizing and outsourcing the technology, and it's you know, Canada.ca is a perfect example. The whole goal that the government of Canada put forward under Harper was to centralize all government websites to one website. They wanted Canada.ca to be the only source for news and information about Canadian government employees. And I'm pretty sure that they were doing that primarily as a cost savings process. And they also like to be able to centralize and control the communication stream to citizens, that they could narrow down what was being said and to who. But I think that a much better approach is to go off and to look at a decentralized nature. And how do you try and use APIs and build for an API first implementation, and have something so you can obviously you need to have something like a Canada.ca that is a landing page that allows people to find information and find out where they need to go, and to sort of prioritize top tasks for average Canadians. That totally makes sense. But you can pull information out of other websites. You can say, let's make sure that we have the best information, the most up-to-date information from Health Canada from their website, and just slurp it up. And if Health Canada's site is built as an API, or exposing their content as an API, and it's well structured, then you can pull that information out, whether you're Canada.ca, or whether you're the Global Affairs Canada, or whether you're a individual that's interested in a particular health file, or if you are trying to go off and worry about alerts for health concerns when you're dealing with a trip to Malaysia. Like, an API first approach allows you to go off and for departments to consolidate information and pull pieces of content together and share it, and have multiple authors in a decentralized place, and to not lock down on having a single website and a single point of failure, but to have a really robust framework that allows people to collaborate together. And just yesterday, the federal budget was announcing that they were going to be putting out a competition for $16 million to replace Phoenix. Phoenix is the payroll system, and I really don't think that if the federal government doesn't start thinking about its technology differently, and start to understand that the value of building on building with components and sharing and collaborating, and I think the federal government's just going to flush another $16 million down the tube, and then it'll be $20 million, and then it'll be $50 million, and maybe at the end of the day they'll have something that works. But they have with an enterprise approach to IT projects. I think that it's going to very quickly become over budget, and as long as it's given access to one proprietary company, whether it's IBM or CGI or OpenText or whoever, as long as they own the intellectual property behind that, then they've got government over a barrel, and they can ultimately charge them no matter what it like. The Canada.ca process was the whole sort of migration of all government websites to Canada.ca. That on paper with the initial contract was only supposed to be $1 million. So I think they're at least at $20 million now in terms of the costs that are being totaled for that website, and they were only a fraction of the way through the migration process. So, government is not very good at procurement, and really needs to rethink its procurement process if we have any hope of getting and reshape their expectations if we have any hope of having smarter government IT implementations. Hopefully that helps.
Sure. So, yeah, definitely. I'll just jump in here with a question from our Slack channel from Alex. He was wondering what are some of the important gaps. I think you covered some of them already, but that government oftentimes misses.
Well, right now we have a government that, on a federal level, that's very excited by new technologies. So government wants to go off and have artificial intelligence solve the problems. And I think that one of the big problems is that AI is not going to solve the problems. Like one of the common ones that keeps coming back is adding the alt text on images. And you can get artificial intelligence to understand that you have three people sitting at a table, and to tag those three people sitting at a table. And you might even be able to go off and to use a database to understand who those three people are. But the amount of computational resources that would be required to be able to evaluate who those three people are and be able to put that in context that's meaningful to the article that's associated with it is just tremendous, because you'd have to build the algorithm to be able to understand the context with which an image is placed on a page, and give an alt text that reads the mind of the author and helps them go off and fills in the blanks for the author. And that's just not going to happen. There's no way that in the foreseeable future that we're going to be able to be reading the content and suggesting. Well, we can suggest words, and certainly suggesting ideas is something that's probably cost effective. Going off and looking at ways not to use artificial intelligence to replace a person and the work of a person, but doing intelligent augmentation, being able to find ways to make it easier for people to go off and to review the content and be able to evaluate that. Like going in and using if you're uploading videos to something like YouTube. It's ridiculous not to go off and start with the automatic translation that YouTube provides, because it might be 80% correct, right? So you start with that basic level of what a machine can tell you, and make sure that it makes sense. But you have to read it and evaluate it, and then clean it up in order to go off and make it ready for the to make sure that it conveys the proper meaning and context. And you can't just assume that a bot is going to be able to make that work. So that's one of the failings in government. Another is the I guess there isn't necessarily the understanding that they need to keep up with the changing technology. There's the Web Experience Toolkit is a great example of a project that did for a few years keep up with the testing of the technology, and It's one of the few themes or frameworks out there that was tested every 6 months. I'm pretty sure it isn't anymore, but the you know in the few years that it was being tested, you could know that if you have adopted the web experience toolkit, that you have addressed these accessibility issues going ahead, and that you've addressed most of the issues you're going to run into. As soon as you're not testing it, you can't necessarily assume that that framework is still going to work, and that you're still going to be able to be as accessible with the new browsers and the new assistive technology, and for that matter, the new content, as people are starting to put out new content with HTML 5.1 or 5.2, and look at ways of keeping up with the content and structure and guidelines of the or standards of the web.
What are some of the more interesting challenges that you are seeing governments take on with open source? Not even necessarily just Drupal, but open source in general, that really kind of spark out the imagination.
I think that I think that there are some. I'm excited by seeing government actually get involved in collaborating on policy issues and collaborating outside of the silos. That has some really interesting potential. There's certainly a few instances where well, actually, this is an easy one. The 18F goes off and posts its information to its website on GitHub, and the raw source files and whatnot are managed on GitHub for a number of different projects, and they're using Jekyll and whatnot to produce a static implementation. So you can fork it, and you can provide comments and issue queues, and you can even look at the version control of the page from either GDS might have the version control enabled, so you can see that, but being able to go up and to have to use the tools that GitHub provides to provide that radical transparency, and I've been able to contribute to documents that are available, that 18F has put out, and make changes to that, and I'm excited by seeing the opportunity to improve content and find ways to provide better information, and I've certainly pointed out different accessibility problems that have come up. I think that probably the most exciting potential adoption of open source tools is probably Estonia, and it's really quite interesting to see what they have done to both integrate, to digitize their government framework, and to open it up so that citizens can do so much more to whether it's registering a business or accessing health records. The Estonian government has a single track that they use to go off and to convey information back and forth between various different agencies, and that's quite exciting. And there's a lot of opportunity for Estonia as one of the leaders in the Digital 7 to be able to shape the direction that other governments are going, and the opportunities for citizenship are quite high. In fact, just earlier today, I got approval for getting a Estonian e-residency. They're having a system where you can apply for e-residency within Estonia, and they've done such an interesting job going and restructuring how their government is structured, and the role of government. Like basically, you can do all of anything you need to do with the government. You can do through electronically, beyond buying a house and getting married. I think those are the two things you don't need to be, that you need to actually be there in person in order to do. But almost every other thing that the Estonian government has set up, you can do that remotely, and you don't need to be involved to do that. So I'm looking forward to picking up my Estonian e-residency card so that I can plug that into my laptop and be able to log in and have a centralized electronic ID that can allow me to set up a business, or I don't know. There's not really a lot of other options for Estonian e-residency, but I think it's a fascinating sort of peek into what is possible with a digital government.
Interesting. Yeah, so we had another kind of question from Alex. He was wondering a little bit more about advantages or disadvantages, I guess, of having a decentralized government.
The advantages, I think that, I mean, partly there's an advantage to going off and having some things be centralized and other things be decentralized, and like you having some information be like the way it is right now with government websites. It's a you could call them being decentralized, but you don't necessarily know what information is on the Health Canada site, or if you're not necessarily sure where it would be within Agriculture Canada, or if there's something that's on the intersection, you can't necessarily find out where content is, especially when they're well, or even worse, there's issues of interprovincial or issues with the federal, provincial, or municipal governments, and you can't necessarily know where something fits if it applies to multiple different jurisdictions. Like you're looking at something like marijuana legislation. Well, this is something that has implications on the federal, provincial, and municipal levels. So as a citizen, where do I begin looking for information on marijuana legalization? Where do I learn about that and the implications for me as a citizen? It's like, well, you have to go to all three. Well, wouldn't it be nicer if we had a decentralized system so that you could go to either of them? You could go to the federal, provincial, or municipal, and you could pull in information that is up to date to the minute from all of those three sites, and be able to browse that information and organize that, manage that information from whichever of those three sites you land on. I think that would be a huge advantage for citizens, because I think as far as most citizens are concerned, there is the government. There is one government who they pay their taxes to, and they don't really care whether it's provincial, federal, or municipal. They just want to know that they pay their taxes and they want to be able to get the services they paid for. So how do we make that as easy as possible? And I think that decentralization can be a big part of that, but it does require a standardized, having a commitment to open standards and having some centralization of processes that break the silos, because there's so much of the problem with government right now is the silos are so high that there's very little collaboration outside of that hierarchy.
So I guess, Mike, other than Estonia, what governments do you see taking on both the challenges of accessibility and open source?
So, yeah, I think I'm being most impressed by what the Government Digital Services has done in the UK. They're not big adopters of Drupal, but they've done quite a lot to both release their own open source content management system, and on an accessibility point of view, they have being very useful in terms of blogging about their experiences, creating, being open about their best practices, looking at participating with the community, the accessibility community. They have also they have created posters to make it easier for content editors to be able to create accessible content and make it easier for people to understand what some of the do's and don'ts are of accessibility. And just the number of, they've put up a lot of resources and included accessibility in their guides for content creation and looking at the process. The other one I wanted to mention is the state of Georgia. They've done some interesting work expanding on Drupal, and I think it's Drupal 7 what they're working on right now. But they're posting all kinds of interesting work to look at innovating and really being leaders, not just for other departments within the state of Georgia, but for other government departments as well, and have invested a lot of effort in making content usable and easy to read, and providing examples of accessibility best practices for their for their readers. Kendra and Nikhil have presented at DrupalCon, and being at DrupalCon and just sort of being part of that Drupal community, and getting a chance to meet with others and learn from the participating in the Drupal community, I think is really quite useful. They've also been experimenting with Amazon Alexa and with voice controls, and I think that this is we're not quite there yet in terms of what people are expecting, and what people are hoping to be able to do with voice control. But I think that we're definitely on the edge of a movement where people are going to be talking to websites from their cars, from their phones, from their home while they're cooking supper, through their television sets. Like, it does seem like this integration is very much going to be used as a greater part of people's expectations of an online experience. So they've been doing a lot of work with that as well, and I think that that's an area where if you can use your voice, if you're able to speak, and the artificial intelligence is able to understand what you've said, it can be really quite useful for people who have more limited physical abilities.
That's some pretty neat stuff out there already.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing going around towards how Drupal kind of appeals to government in multiple levels and stuff like that. One of the areas that Drupal 7 kind of made some headway in back in the day, so to speak, was the concept of big data, and some of those initiatives around that. Are we still doing well? There's still a lot of innovation, especially around the Drupal 8 side of things, and Drupal's still a good fit for the big data movement.
I think that it is still quite good. I think that it depends on Drupal is as you know, a really flexible interface, and you can. It's almost neat when you go off and hear about people using Drupal as either a front end or a back end, or as middleware between two different systems. Like, it's something that is in many ways like a Swiss Army knife that allows you to access information or manage things in a lot of different ways. So I think that Drupal does allow you to go off and to access multiple databases, and there maybe in terms of big data that MySQL isn't the best format, but being able to link into something like MongoDB, or something that is a better, fast implementation of big data. I mean, that can be quite useful as well. It's a very useful front end tool for managing and organizing information, and the ability to engage with Solr or other search tools to be able to collect and organize that, or to be able to plug in various different ways to organize displays of information. That is certainly something that Drupal is really quite good at. But it's not good for everything. There are places where you might want to go off and to work on a Python is probably more powerful out of the box for doing data manipulation, and there's certainly other tools like R that are really very powerful for other big data implementations. But and there's also I don't know if there's a Drupal 8 implementation of DCAN yet, but the Drupal implementation of CCAN, which is DCAN, was quite useful for displaying and organizing information like open data assets, and collecting and organizing data sets for that. So that was quite useful. But even being just a front end for CCAN, that's powerful as well. And open.canada.ca website is a site which is very much a CCAN implementation using Drupal as its front end and integrating with other back-end systems like GC Docs to go off and collect and organize information.
Oh, that's kind of neat. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And with Drupal 8's kind of API-driven implementation too, I think it leads itself well to this kind of use case because of how you can move data in and out and do those kind of cool things there.
For sure. And whether or not you're leveraging another library or not to do some of the magic, I mean that's totally fine. It's just a controlled knowable space that allows you to go off and to manage displays and authentication and make sure that you're managing your user base in a way that's this effective and having a clear presentation. So that's yeah, very useful from a data managing big data products. So
I think we have one last question here. It's kind of a last minute pop in here. For developers and site builders who have maybe not been considering accessibility in the projects up till now, is there any easy wins to help bring things together, help close the gap a little bit more, I guess is probably the question.
So a few things that'll help. I mean, it's always going to be cheaper to deal with accessibility if you look at it earlier on in a project. The later it is, the more expensive it's going to be, and the more problematic it's going to be. It's going to be harder for you to go off and to fix all the things that you missed. But there's lots of really great tools out there that you can use and integrate with to do automated testing of your site. So the Wave toolbar is a great one for people to get started with. It's one it's free, and it allows you to quickly scan a web page and identify where there's problems, and there's a nice little visual highlight that you can use to identify the problems on the site. Tenon is another one, tenon.io. You can evaluate an individual page for free, but there's an API that's really quite extensive, and that allows you to catch up to about 25% of accessibility errors. And it's all of these automated tools, whether it's SiteImprove or Wave or any automated tool, is only going to catch about maybe it's a quarter of the accessibility problems on the site. So you need to use them to catch those the stupid contrast issues or the issues of input forms that are missing labels or other things like that might be missed in your page. But I think that but it's yeah, you have to go off and use manual testing in order to catch most of them, but manual testing sounds really difficult, and a lot of people go off and, if they're looking at accessibility, will jump right to using a screen reader, which they shouldn't do. They shouldn't jump right to using a screen reader because most people don't understand how a screen reader works. And even if you've developed a website and you start using a screen reader, even if you do understand it, it's like, well, you're coming at the web page with a lot of assumptions because you know how the page is built. Whereas somebody who's blind and visiting your website won't have the advantage of knowing how you've structured the menus and knowing how you've organized your content. It takes a different kind of thing to go off and to evaluate a website with a screen reader, but it doesn't take very much training to learn how to tab through a website. So if you've set your browser to be able to accept keyboard inputs, you can quickly learn how to go off and to tab through a website and make sure that you can identify where the links are. You can identify how to access different functions of your website. Can you start and stop a video if you've got a video on there? Those kinds of things are really quite useful to be able to test. And if you do those two things, if you do automated testing and you use keyboard only testing, you're going to catch a lot of errors, and those two things are probably the most important things that will catch most of the annoying problems you're going to run into. And blind users who are using screen readers are also keyboard only users. They're just using their keyboard and a mouse. Sorry, they're using their keyboard and not their screen in order to go off and interact with it. But they, you can still go off and learn quite a lot about how to navigate a page and how your site is, how focus is managed as you're tabbing through a site. So those are the things that I'd recommend to work on or to look at.
Very cool. Well, I want to say thank you, Michael, for joining us this evening. It's been really fascinating stuff.
It was fun.
We've learned a lot.
Yeah. Thanks for your questions. They're excellent. It was a nice way to sort of think through things. I'll be presenting at DrupalCon Nashville in the core discussions and on accessibility, and with a panel with some other great Drupal accessibility experts. So it's nice to sort of be thinking about these things beforehand, and hopefully I'll be able to connect with some of you in Nashville over a beer.
So if people want to get a hold of you or see what you're working on these days, what's the best way to do that?
So my company is Open Concept Consulting, and we're at openconcept.ca. If you want to reach, I tweet quite a lot at mgifford. So I tweet about open governance and accessibility and Drupal and a bunch of other stuff. So feel free to go off and to take a look at that. Yeah, that's the best way to get a hold of me, is either through the Open Concept website or through Twitter.
Trevor, do you have anything to add?
No, not at this point. I think that was a great discussion.
Excellent.
We'll put some few notes up on our show notes about the conversation we've had today. And I think we'll end it here. And again, thank you very much to everybody who contributed questions. And for our next meetup for March, we are looking at doing a global training day event. For those who aren't familiar, a Drupal Global Training Day days are initiatives by the Drupal Association and the Drupal community to educate users on all that Drupal has to offer. Trainers from companies and local groups around the world help newcomers and seasoned users alike get inspired and empowered to start great work and learn about Drupal's features. We'll release a bit more information on how that's going to be structured and the type of content we'll be doing in the next couple of days or weeks, and stay tuned for that. Otherwise, if you want to participate, come join us on Slack. Visit our website at drupalatlantic.ca. On the right-hand sidebar, there's information on how to get connected and participate with the group here. You can see the show notes and anything that we've talked about here tonight on our website again at drupalatlantic.ca/meetups, as well as the information in our past meetups. It always helps us if you like us and follow us on YouTube and follow us on Twitch, and come and see us when we're live, or if not, we'll have our recordings up after each episode. And with that, thank you everybody, and keep Drupaling.